We are going to be discussing a case that's been requested multiple times by our audience across multiple platforms, and that is the story of Phoenix Sinclair. Now, Phoenix's case comes with a very large cast of characters, from caseworkers to relatives to bystanders simply concerned for the little girl's safety. And another thing that should be mentioned is the fact that due to the age of this case, there were very few pictures of some of the parties involved. Not only does this mean that finding pictures of Phoenix was very difficult, it's actually impossible to find pictures of Phoenix's killers. We've seen some conjecture online that there is some Canadian law that offers protection to Phoenix's killers in this specific circumstance, but there's nothing we could find on that. If you are an expert on Canadian law, I would love to hear from you in the comments about what's happening here, because these monsters deserve no protection. But whether or not there are enough pictures available, it is not going to stop us from telling Phoenix's story. So without further ado, I present to you the story of Phoenix Sinclair.
Samantha Camach and Steve Sinclair came from rather troubled backgrounds. Both of their birth families had issues with alcoholism and violence. While they were young, the Canadian Child and Family Services, or CFS, took them away and put them into foster care. Steve was born on May 15, 1980, and was taken in by the Winnipeg CFS on July 12, 1989, when a family member reported violence, alcoholism, and SA within the Sinclair home. Steve spent the remainder of his childhood in 3 foster homes. He spent the most time in the third one. Steve temporarily ran away in February of 1998. Towards the end of his time in the system, he reportedly dove headfirst into the bottle and wrecked his relationship with his foster family. When he turned 18, Child Welfare closed his case. Samantha was born on September 9, 1981, and was removed from her home on June 21, 1993, after CFS in Winnipeg received word that Samantha's alcoholic mother was mistreating her. Samantha spent 3 years in government foster care until she became a permanent ward of Cree Nation Child and Family Services. When she was 16, Samantha gave birth to a baby boy who was taken in by the Cree Nation Agency as a permanent ward. She kept her pregnancy to herself and didn't make any preparations leading up to her labor. Samantha made no attempts to be in her son's life. Various reports describe Samantha and Steve as having a history of violence, but the specifics are unclear.
Samantha and Steve began dating in 1998. She became pregnant again in 1999 and gave birth to Phoenix Victoria Hope Sinclair on April 23, 2000 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She was born a healthy baby, but the hospital staff quickly took issue with Samantha and Steve. Just like with her last pregnancy, Samantha was not prepared. She said she didn't like doctors, so she did not seek prenatal care. The couple did not have the necessary supplies such as clothes or baby formula in their possession. A nurse asked Samantha point blank what her plans were for her baby, and Samantha said, "I don't know." Winnipeg Child and Welfare Services concluded Samantha and Steve were unfit to be parents. Same day she was born, Phoenix was promptly taken into the care of CFS. Phoenix spent the first 5 months of her life in foster care. Her parents were granted visitation. Then in September, CFS offered to return Phoenix to her parents, provided they receive mandatory instruction in childcare, undergo mental health evaluations, and allow for consistent visits from a social worker. These conditions were not properly enforced. Childcare instruction and the mental health evaluations, similarly, were insufficient and lacking. In February of 2001, when Samantha was pregnant with Phoenix's sister, CFS worker Dolores Chief Albajesis visited the Camach Sinclair household to discuss more frequent social worker visits. 4 months later, these visits never came to fruition. Later that year in April, Samantha gave birth to Echo Sinclair. CFS considered Steve to be the primary caregiver for his daughters. He and Samantha separated in July following a police response to a DV call to their home the month before. Steve took Phoenix and Echo with him. Echo died at only 3 months old from respiratory failure and complications from pneumonia.
Steve said he loved Phoenix from the moment she was born. He was the one who chose her name. He wanted to be a father and give her the childhood he couldn't have. However, his actions would not back up his words. More often than not, Steve left Phoenix in the care of his sister Jenny or his friends, a couple named Kim Edwards and Rohan Stevenson. CFS workers were aware that Jenny Sinclair and Kim Edwards and Rohan Stevenson were Phoenix's designated babysitters, but they did not make any record of who was watching the young girl or when. Caseworkers Kathy Epps and Lorna Hansen replaced Dolores Chief Abogesis following Echo's passing. They closed Phoenix's case file in October of 2001. Neither of them had seen Phoenix in person for an extended period of time.
In November of 2002, a small chunk of styrofoam found its way into Phoenix's nose, and she was in pain. Rohan Stevenson, who is Steve Sinclair's friend and Phoenix's godfather, told Steve that Phoenix needed to go to a hospital right away. Kim Edwards, who is another friend of Steve, said the same thing. Steve knew about the styrofoam, and so he took Phoenix to a walk-in clinic where he was told the foreign object would come out on its own with time. Now, Kim Edwards was unsure if Steve actually did take Phoenix to a clinic based on what the nurse allegedly said, so Kim took Phoenix herself. The clinic would not treat Phoenix because Kim did not have the little girl's medical information on hand, but they advised she could try removing the styrofoam with a pair of tweezers. Kim tried, but Phoenix was screaming and crying out in pain when she did. On February 26, 2003, Phoenix finally went to the hospital to get the styrofoam removed. It was her godfather, Rohan, not Steve, who took her, and only because he smelled an awful smell while watching Phoenix. She had an infection, and she needed medicine for it. The hospital staff noted Phoenix's physical appearance and quickly suspected neglect. They sent a report to CFS. The reporter's name was redacted, but they said they did not think Steve Sinclair would give Phoenix her prescribed medication at the proper time if he was left unsupervised. According to an official report from social worker Roberta Dick, the foreign body was removed from Phoenix's nose, and the discharge in the nose was very foul-smelling. The mucosa in her nose was red and sore. Antibiotics were prescribed, but, name redacted, did not know if the antibiotics would be given to Phoenix or not. The hospital requested that this matter be assessed further given the concerns related to physical and medical neglect and inadequate care of the child.
Phoenix remained in her father's care following her hospital visit. Social worker Laura Forrest tried multiple times to visit Steve's home. Each time she did, no one would come to the door, or Steve would say Phoenix was elsewhere. Laura Forrest's report on her first visit, 2 days after Phoenix went to the hospital, said Steve was sober but difficult. He seemed annoyed at being in this predicament. Ms. Forrest noted Steve had a black eye, which he actively avoided discussion of. Phoenix was with Steve's friends, but he did not give Ms. Forrest an address. When told that Laura Forrest would need to return to the Sinclair residence to see Phoenix in person, Steve only said, "We will see about that." He also said he did not know about the styrofoam and the infection in Phoenix's nose. In her subsequent visits, when no one answered the door, she left her card. Her workload and an absence of other concerns kept her away from Phoenix's case until April 17th through May 9th. She never saw Phoenix in person during these visits.
In June, Steve hosted a party at his home. An anonymous reporter alerted social workers that Phoenix Sinclair was left unsupervised in the presence of alcohol and illicit substances. CFS once again got involved. He told Steve he could regain custody of his daughter after attending counseling for his alcoholism. However, he got Phoenix back without ever going to counseling. Now, according to Phoenix's file, in November, Steve's sister Jenny called Samantha and said Phoenix was alone. Steve had left her unattended in his house. Samantha brought Phoenix to her residence on Furby Street. Phoenix's time with her mother from November to January went undocumented in her case file until Samantha's former roommate sent a report on January 15, 2004. They alleged Samantha drank and consumed crack cocaine in her home in front of Phoenix. The roommate had not seen the family since Christmas. It seems that for this reason, officials decided this was not a high priority. When they finally gathered more information, Phoenix was no longer on the property. Barbara Kloss, an employee of the Crisis Response Unit, spoke with the former roommate. In her records, she wrote the following. As we continued to talk and I asked questions, source of referral told me that she discovered that some people came to pick up Phoenix around January 2nd through 4th and took her to their place in Selkirk. SOR further said that there has been much arguing going on among all the adults, but couldn't/wouldn't elaborate on exactly who was doing the arguing and what it was they were actually arguing about. It was found that Phoenix was in a place of safety with a family named Stevenson who lived on Selkirk Avenue. An attempt to speak with the Stevenson family was unsuccessful, as both the home telephone number along with Mr. Stevenson's work phone number are out of service at this time. In the final paragraph, Barbara Kloss added, Given that there is a possibility of risk to young Phoenix, and with the uncertainty of where the child actually is at this time, it is recommended this file be opened to Northwest Intake for investigation and assessment. Because the situation has been an ongoing concern, as it would appear from discussion with SOR, coupled with the history in both parents' files, a 5-day response time is indicated. In short, Canada's child welfare system misplaced a child due to their own incompetence. Barbara Kloss later said it was within her power to send an investigation team to Rohan Stevenson's home immediately, but Phoenix was not considered a priority, so neither she nor her supervisor, Diana Verrier, took that step.
It wasn't until January 21st when a pair of caseworkers, Lisa Conlon and Monica Marks, paid a visit to Rohan Stevenson's home. They asked about Steve. Now, according to Lisa's record, Rohan said he didn't know where Steve was and that there was a lot of rumors and everyone is saying different things. Caseworker Conlon said that Phoenix seemed fine during her visit, but she did not spend any time alone with the child or even spoke to her directly. Rohan said nothing about picking up Phoenix from Samantha's residence. The caseworker just assumed he was the one who did it. Caseworkers Conlon and Marks also visited Steve's home. He did not answer the door. According to their notes, looking inside, workers could see no signs that anyone had been there recently. The home was clean and furnished, but there was holes in the walls and lighting fixtures that were pulled off the ceiling. It didn't look like anyone was staying there recently. Phoenix's file was closed again in February of 2004. Now, also around this time, Kim Edwards and Rohan Stevenson broke off their relationship. It seems they were still living together and watching over Phoenix when Steve was unavailable. Rohan's sons also took on childcare responsibilities despite being children themselves.
Samantha was pregnant again that spring. This time, the father was her boyfriend, Carl Wesley McKay. Samantha was seen attending meetings held by Manitoba's Healthy Baby Community Support Program. She never brought Phoenix with her, and she always had excuses for her daughter's location. Samantha began attending these bi-weekly meetings in March, but Phoenix wasn't in her care until April. Samantha and her mother visited the Stevenson household and took Phoenix with them. According to Kim Edwards and Rohan Stevenson, it was just before Phoenix's 4th birthday. Rohan was warned by social workers not to let Samantha take Phoenix without their knowledge, but he did so anyway. Rohan would later testify the following. Samantha actually didn't seem that enthusiastic about the whole thing, but it was her mother that was saying we'd like to raise our own kids. I assumed that they would take her and then Sam would get sick of her in 2 days and bring her back. Had I known Samantha's mother was a crackhead, I certainly wouldn't have.
That was the last time Rohan and Kim would see Phoenix. Kim spoke with CFS and was told that Phoenix wasn't her concern anymore. She also tried contacting the local police force, but they said they had to hear this from Steve directly. Steve didn't know Samantha's contact information or her address. His sister Jenny was on speaking terms with Samantha, and she relayed information about Phoenix's well-being. He didn't know Samantha was living with her new boyfriend. Steve moved to Ontario, and Jenny kept him updated about his daughter. Phoenix's file reopened in May. It wasn't from Kim's efforts nor from CFS suddenly realizing their mistakes. It was from Steve Sinclair's employment and income assistance caseworker.
This caseworker, who was unnamed in official documents, had various responsibilities, among them keeping her clients' information on a digital database. The client's dependent children were also eligible to receive employment and income assistance benefits. Their database said Phoenix was living with Steve in April of 2004. Same month, Samantha took her from the Stevenson home. This caseworker was a mandated reporter. If she suspected any kind of mistreatment, she was to report it. While investigating Steve's file, social workers saw a note created on the 26th of April. It briefly stated that Phoenix Sinclair was under the care of a childless couple. Despite Kim Edwards trying to contact them earlier, CFS said they did not know that Phoenix was with her mother until May of 2004. On the 13th, 2 social workers, Tracy Forbes and Kathleen Marks, visited Samantha Camacha's residence to get more concrete information. Caseworkers Forbes and Marks had 2 goals: see Phoenix in person and verify that she was cared for. When they knocked on the door, a man answered. He only called himself Wes and said Phoenix and Samantha were not home. Wes was Samantha's boyfriend, Carl Wesley McKay. Phoenix was put on Samantha's EIA plan, but Samantha was on Carl's plan. Carl was Phoenix's de facto provider. Caseworkers Forbes and Marks did not complete their goals on May 13th, so they tried again in June. No one answered the door, so they pushed their visit to July. Caseworker Forbes wrote a summary of the visit, and it follows. The home was tidy and well furnished. Phoenix was present, and she appeared clean, healthy, and well cared for. Samantha also appeared healthy. She denies abusing substances and having any difficulties coping with Phoenix. Samantha advised that her main support is her boyfriend. Samantha advised that she would be registering Phoenix for nursery school in the fall. Caseworker Forbes surmised that Wes, who answered the door 2 months ago, was Samantha's boyfriend, but she didn't think to ask for his information. Phoenix was registered for school. She was registered at the Wellington Nursery School between September 16th and 26th of 2004. According to the principal, it was a common practice for her to schedule a meeting to meet the child and the parents. This meeting never materialized. School staff said they did not recognize the name Phoenix Sinclair, nor did they meet a child of that name during the month of September.
Samantha and Carl had their child at the end of 2004, and Samantha was discharged from the hospital on December 1st. Now, because of Samantha's troubled history, CFS was called. Social worker Shelley Wilcox noted the various reports about Phoenix's well-being. She easily gathered information about Samantha, but had a much harder time learning about Carl. Ms. Wilcox's report shows she contacted EIA caseworker Ellen Waugh about Carl, but neither woman had an independent recollection of this conversation. When the trail ran cold, Ms. Wilcox tried speaking to hospital staff. She tried speaking with Nurse Mary Wu, but Canada's Public Health Information Act barred her from giving the social worker the necessary information. Nurse Wu aided Samantha throughout her pregnancy. Later, she said she knew of Phoenix but had not seen her in person. Even if she did, she was concerned that the law would not allow her to give private information about her patients, despite being a mandated reporter. When Ms. Wilcox eventually saw Samantha, she closed the case file because she seemed well. She did not look into Carl McKay. Had social workers in CFS done their due diligence, they would have found that Carl Wesley McKay was a dangerous individual. They would have found his record of violent crime dating back to 1991. Included charges of making threats, assault, and assault with a deadly weapon.
Carl McKay was no stranger to violence against his past romantic partners. His former girlfriend's identity is redacted in official documents. We do not know her name or even if she was his only victim. These records could easily be spread across various former girlfriends. With the publicly available information that we have, we know that Carl Wesley McKay's record includes the following incidents: brandishing a machete, breaking a nose, and various beatings, including one where he used a supporting leg from a bathroom sink. The mother of his 2 children said he once threatened to push one of their sons down a flight of stairs. She covered for his violence multiple times, until he was eventually arrested and charged. He was living with his girlfriend and their children while on probation. Miriam Brown, who was his probation officer, would later say she feared for her safety after a meeting with Carl. She wrote to the Northwest Winnipeg CFS that she believed his partner and children were, and I quote, at risk due to Mr. McKay's presence in the home. Now, Carl Wesley McKay's information and criminal record were available for social workers to view, but they didn't, choosing instead to believe that this stranger, simply named Wes, was not a threat whatsoever.
In March, 2 sources of referral reported that Phoenix was not well. Now, a source of referral, or SOR, can really be anyone: educators, police, medical personnel, counselors, social workers, etc. Most are mandated reporters, but they can simply be a community member such as a friend, a family member, or a neighbor. According to these SORs, Phoenix was wetting her bed, acting out, and touching herself. These SORs saw Samantha locking her bedroom door, meaning Samantha's, before going out with her youngest child, the one that she had with Carl. Another time, when they returned to Samantha's apartment, they heard crying coming from the bedroom. One of the SORs testified about a phone call she had with Samantha. Samantha was bathing Phoenix, and she heard her say that if she wouldn't play with herself so much, she wouldn't stink so much. Mind you, Phoenix would have been just a month shy of her 5th birthday at this point in our story. The SORs called CFS to alert them about their concerns. CFS said they had to give them their names and they were uncomfortable about doing so. One of the SORs was concerned that CFS wouldn't take their concerns seriously, so she asked someone else to call on her behalf.
CFS visited Samantha at her apartment. She manages somehow to just keep them in the hallway the entire visit. They do see her baby, and to them, the baby appeared healthy and happy. But they don't see Phoenix. Now, surely, however, if the baby looks fine, everything else must be fine too, right? Well, that's what they thought. One day, the foster son of Carl's ex actually met Phoenix. It's unclear as to why anyone associated with Carl's exes would have been in Carl's presence given his history of violence, much less allowing their son to be around him. They said Phoenix had a wound on her head, which the foster son guessed was 2 days old or less. He asked Phoenix what happened, and Carl answered for her, claiming that she hit her head on a coffee table. Phoenix parroted his answer. Foster's son suspected Carl had hurt her. However, he had run-ins with the law prior, so he was hesitant to call CFS. He told his foster mother instead, thinking she would call, but she didn't. Carl's oldest son, who was 14 years old at the time, also saw Phoenix. This is how he described her appearance, and I quote, She looked rough, man. She looked all beat up and shit, like, she didn't look like she did when I first met her. Now, I mean, she's just like all skinny and whatever. She just didn't look the same.
In April 2005, Samantha and Carl moved to Fisher River, a Cree First Nations reserve north of Winnipeg. Phoenix went with them, along with their infant child and Carl's youngest son from a previous relationship. Carl's son was 12 years old, and his mother wanted to get him away from Winnipeg's gang culture, as she put it. She decided that Carl Wesley McKay was the safer option. Carl's older son joined them occasionally. Now, when I first read this, I found the idea of Winnipeg having gangs to be a bit weird. I have no idea why, but in my head, I picture gang violence to be an us problem, despite knowing there are gangs all over the world. However, Winnipeg has its fair share of street gangs, and organized crime families can also be found in the Montreal and Toronto areas. The more you know.
Carl found work as a substitute school bus driver. His criminal record didn't seem to be an issue. He also had distant relatives living on the reserve and the neighboring one as well. One asked about the child in Carl's car. Carl said Phoenix was his girlfriend's kid, and that she, this is his words, was too ugly to be his child. Now, another relative visited Carl's home and noticed there were no signs of a little girl living there. Carl and Samantha did visit once, and she asked about Phoenix. The couple said Phoenix was with her granny and laughed. This relative also recalled a time she saw Carl and Samantha walking with their child. Phoenix trailed behind them. Samantha yelled at Phoenix to fucking hurry up and walk. Carl's niece visited him many times, so she only saw Phoenix twice. The first time she said Phoenix was small, skinny, and unhealthy, and her hair was short. Carl called Phoenix a fucking bitch and isolated her in a dark room. 2 hours later, Carl did not let her out. Second time Carl's niece saw Phoenix, she said, she was in the room, first room on the left. I went to the door, opened it, and she was standing there with a blanket over her head. She was just standing there looking at me. And I asked her what her name was because I didn't know if that was Phoenix or not. But she just stood there, and my uncle told me to get out of that room, shut the door, and get out. So I did. Carl's niece didn't report this to CFS because she was afraid of what Carl would do if he found out.
Allison Kekawash doesn't mince words about her uncle, Carl Wesley McKay.
Because he's wicked?
Kekawash used to take her own baby to the house McKay rented in Fisher River, but her first play date with 5-year-old Phoenix Sinclair was cut short when the little girl accidentally knocked another child to the floor. McKay grabbed Phoenix roughly, called her a bitch, and threw her in a room.
Can't remember if there was a bed in there or not. It was a dark room.
The next time Kekawash visited McKay, Phoenix was again alone in the dark room.
And she was standing there with a blanket over her head. She was in a panty. And she was just standing there looking at me.
The little girl's body was covered in marks.
I don't know if it was bruises or scrapes or dirt.
About a week later, she returned to the house.
It's like I felt this bad feeling. Like, as if Wesley killed somebody.
Kekawash walked in through the back door, her eyes drawn to the basement steps.
What did you see when you walked in?
Drips of blood.
Carl McKay, usually lying down, was running up and down the basement steps in a cleaning frenzy. Samantha Kimach was sitting at a computer weeping. Kekawash asked where Phoenix was. They told her she was in Ontario with her father.
Because she was a bad little girl, from what my uncle told me.
Kekawash disagrees.
A sweet, innocent girl.
Today, Kekawash was asked why she didn't report the abuse.
I was scared of my uncle.
Phoenix's life with Samantha and Carl quickly became hell on earth. Her bedroom was a cold, dark basement, which was often locked. She was degraded, starved, and denied medical attention. Carl beat Phoenix, sometimes with his hands and feet, sometimes with objects, the handle of a fridge, a broomstick, a pole. He shot her with a BB gun. He played a game he called choking the chicken, where he would choke her until she fell unconscious. When Samantha wasn't watching idly by, she was involved more directly. One night, Phoenix threw up, and the couple forced her to eat her own vomit on the floor. At only 5 years old, CFS received a total of 13 reports about Phoenix's mistreatment at the hands of her family.
On June 11th, 2005, Carl's son witnessed the beating that would take Phoenix's life. She was in the basement. For 15 to 20 minutes, Carl beat her without stopping, while Samantha simply watched from the staircase. When he was done, the couple both left the children in the house alone. Carl's son went down to the basement to check on Phoenix. Her body was cold and she was not breathing. He didn't say a word to anybody because he was scared of what would happen if he did. Carl and Samantha came back home. They tried resuscitating Phoenix by performing CPR and running water on her. Instead of calling law enforcement or medical professionals, they got to work disposing of her body. Carl's son was left with his mother for the weekend while they cleaned and painted the basement. Carl's niece visited a short time later. She said she saw dried blood by the back door entrance of the house and that Samantha was visibly upset. The couple said that Phoenix was back with her father. Carl's niece didn't stay for long. She knew there was something wrong, but she wasn't sure what it was. Carl's sons were returned to their mother in July of 2005. During their time with their father, the boys contacted their mother multiple times about how they did not have any food in the home. Carl and Samantha weren't there when CFS visited. The boys were being watched by someone with a warrant out for their arrest, so they were whisked back to their mother. The boys did not say anything about Phoenix, and the CFS workers didn't see any signs of another child in the home.
Carl and Samantha moved back to Winnipeg with their child, where they had yet another baby in December. They listed Phoenix as a dependent on legal documents and received benefits for her. Whenever they were asked about her by acquaintances, they said she was with her father. These acquaintances did not know Steve, so they didn't press any further. In February of 2005, Carl's younger son visited the couple in Winnipeg. He said he saw his father hit his infant child's hand with a screwdriver. That finally urged him to tell his older brother about Phoenix, who then told their mother. Carl's ex and sons alerted the police about Phoenix's death in early March. Instead of coming clean, Samantha borrowed a friend's young daughter and pretended that she was Phoenix. Thankfully, the officers weren't fooled. Samantha and Carl were arrested and questioned. They both broke down during their interrogations and tried to shift the blame on one another. Eventually, Carl led police officers to where they hid Phoenix's body. They had buried her in Fisher River's landfill, where she remained for 7 months. When forensic experts examined her, they likened her injuries to those from severe car crashes.
And where in there is Phoenix Sinclair?
Right this way.
Okay. And exactly where in there? Okay. How far in the ground? How far in the ground will she be?
Approximately 8 inches.
About 8 inches?
8 to 10 inches.
Okay.
The soil on top.
Yeah.
Look, right here. Just like this.
About that deep?
That deep, yeah.
Okay. And what'd you use, by the way?
I use a spade.
Okay. And what else?
That's it.
Okay. And is there anything else you want to say while we're here? This is your time.
Yeah. I've done this for Phoenix, to recover her body.
Okay.
Because she deserves a proper burial. And I've done it for my boys, as well as myself and Samantha.
All right. Okay. Anything else you want to say,
I'm
Wes?
very sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Cause you guys, because I know it's your job, and you shouldn't be out here, and Phoenix should be out
Wow.
roaming.
Well, we'll get her out.
Yes.
Okay. I think that's about it. Just how will we find her in there? How will she be?
He'll be face up. The plastic is I wrap her in plastic with a yellow rain jacket. Her head being covered with the head part, and the rest of her body over like.
Okay. Is there any markings on the ground, indicators?
No indicators because we just put it right here. In this, I believe it's right here. I'm 100% sure now because I know.
You're 100%?
Yes.
Okay.
Because that was all water. Like,
Wes, which way, do you know, or can you recall which way her head or her feet would be pointing?
Her head's here. Sorry. Her head's here.
Okay.
And then down.
Where are her feet?
Her feet is here. And her head's right here.
And is there anything else in there with her at all?
Just the dirt she'll be covered with.
Okay.
Like I said, the grave was about this wide because she's a very small girl. So it's about this wide. And find her.
2 years later, in December of 2008, Carl and Samantha were both convicted of first-degree murder. They were given life sentences with parole eligibility after 25 years. As of 2022, Samantha has been allowed supervised trips outside of prison to visit family and an Indigenous elder for spiritual development. Judge Edward N. Hughes, also known as Ted Hughes, was put in charge of the public inquiry examining and relaying Phoenix's murder. Judge Hughes spent roughly 3 months worth of time compiling this public inquiry. He listed over 50 goals for restructuring Canada's child welfare system. Judge Hughes said that it's up to the entire community to keep children out of harm's way and that a single system cannot sustain that goal in the long term. He believed that a case as violent as Phoenix's stayed undetected for so long due to untrained and overburdened workers, as well as a lack of resources. Among his recommendations for improvement, Judge Hughes listed a bachelor's degree in social work as a required prerequisite, a maximum of 20 cases per worker, openness between childcare agencies, educating workers on generational poverty, and making amendments to the Social Work Profession Act. The entirety of this document is available for public viewing online. Now, Phoenix Sinclair's murder is a tragedy, and even worse, it is a tragedy that could have been easily avoided had the institutions in place done what they were supposed to do. This disorganized, untrained state of CFS did not come overnight. It was decades in the making. Now, most of those who watch our channel are in the US, so some of you might be unfamiliar that in Canada, up until the 1950s, all Indigenous children were required to attend residential schools. The goal of the Canadian government at the time was to assimilate young First Nations children into Western culture. Many of these children were banned from speaking to their families. These schools were hub for mistreatment of every kind imaginable towards these children. An unknown number of kids died while attending residential schools. The survivors of these schools came out traumatized, and unfortunately, this was during a time when mental health awareness was far worse than it currently is now. The residential school system was phased out in the 1950s. The 60s scoop, as coined by author Patrick Johnson in 1983, occurred between the 1950s and the 1980s when social workers forcibly took children from their families and made them wards of the system. These untrained social workers saw anything short of a middle-class, white picket fence lifestyle as unacceptable living conditions for a child. They were not expected to understand Indigenous cultures or how generational poverty does not inherently mean that children are being neglected or mistreated. The effects of residential schools in the 60s scoop are still seen to this day, and Indigenous children still make up a large portion of Canada's child welfare system. Steve Sinclair and Samantha Kamach are both Indigenous. They're both raised within the child welfare system. Steve's mother was a survivor of a residential school, which gave him an inherent distrust for government entities. This is in no way forgiving either of them, but simply giving the background context that many of those watching could be unfamiliar with. If prevention is the ultimate goal, it is important to understand the landscape in which Phoenix's murder took place. Judge Hughes has said that these factors were direct root causes that led to Phoenix Sinclair's murder. Manitoba's Social Work Profession Act was made into law in 2009. It made certification a hard requirement for those working in child welfare programs. Judge Hughes's recommended amendments that we mentioned earlier were added officially in 2014.
These are all fair and founded criticisms of a failed system, but it's still important to recognize the faults of neglectful and outwardly violent adults. Phoenix looked to these grown-ups in her life to keep her safe, and they all deserted her when she needed them the most. If not for her stepbrother's confession, she may very well still be buried in a shallow grave. It's sad how Phoenix has become a symbol of the Canadian government's failure to protect vulnerable children. Even while researching this case, it's hard to find any information about Phoenix separate from her death. All we have about Phoenix herself is from Steve's testimonies and victim impact statements, which read, "She loved to play guitar, read, draw, watch movies, among other things." Phoenix is not a symbol. She was a guiltless, innocent child who deserved more than the poor hand that was dealt to her. She deserves to stand with the rest of us today. But because of mistreatment, neglect, and outright incompetence, her life was taken much too soon. If given a chance to live and grow in a safe, loving environment, Phoenix Sinclair would be 24 years old. Her sister Echo would be 23. Maybe they would have sought out higher education, started a family of their own, or gotten involved in their local communities.
If there is any hope to come out of this tragedy, it's that everyone around the world can look at Phoenix Victoria Hope Sinclair and promise in her memory to never let something so terrible and preventable happen again. In his inquiry, Judge Ted Hughes wrote the following: "To truly honor Phoenix, we need to provide all of Manitoba's children with a good start in life and offer to the most vulnerable an escape from the cycle of poverty and vulnerability. My hope is that the heart-wrenching evidence I heard will serve as a catalyst to ensure that the recommendations that emerge from this report are wholeheartedly embraced and implemented. The public interest that this inquiry has received encourages me in the belief that achievement of the better protection of all Manitoba's children, and especially the most vulnerable, will be the true legacy of Phoenix Sinclair."